The call came just after 11:30 on a Thursday that had already been strange. My dog Rosie wouldn't eat her food that morning, and I'd torn the cuff of my work shirt trying to grab a hot baking tray before it slipped. But none of that came close to the static, quiet dread that settled in my chest the second I saw the name on my screen, unknown number, Connecticut. I almost let it go to voicemail. The guy on the other end introduced himself as Stephen Miller, a social worker at a long-term care facility up in Stamford. The words came out too fast at first, then slowed way down as he said something I couldn't quite process. "We believe we have your uncle here, Mr. Adams, your mother's brother, Robert." I didn't say anything, didn't breathe, didn't blink. I just stared at the ugly peeling paint on the side of my microwave like it might explain what the hell was going on. My uncle Robert had been dead for 17 years, or at least that's what we were told. I was 20 when we got the news. A brief phone call from a friend of his, someone my mom didn't even know. They said he'd died in a fire overseas, something about Thailand or maybe the Philippines. I remember my mom crying in the kitchen, her hand covering her mouth, her other one gripping a water glass so tightly I thought it would shatter. There was no funeral, no body, just silence, distance, and time. My uncle was gone, and we never asked why he had disappeared in the first place or what led him there. It was like he'd burned himself out of our lives completely, and we were supposed to accept it. Now here I was, 37, sitting in my tiny apartment on a Thursday morning, being told he wasn't dead at all. I asked the man to repeat himself. He did, slower this time. "Robert Adams is currently in our facility. He's stable, but he's requested no contact with family. Legally, we're still required to notify next of kin regarding certain decisions about his care." I asked how long they'd had him. 4 years, the man said. "He came in under a different name, Robert James. We only pieced things together after he had a minor stroke last week and gave us some updated medical history. Your mother's name was in his intake documents, Patricia Adams." That was my mom, still alive, still waiting for a call from her brother that never came. I thanked the man, told him I'd speak to my mother. I hung up. And then I sat there for a long time, just listening to the buzz of the refrigerator and the tap drip from my bathroom sink. The thing about my mom is she never really let herself grieve. She just sort of packed the pain into the corners of her life. She didn't keep photos of Robert on the walls, but she didn't throw them away either. There was a shoebox in the hall closet with some old Polaroids, a worn baseball glove, a letter or two. I only saw her open it once. Her hands shook the whole time. That night I drove to her place. It was a little past 7 when I got there. The lights were on and the front screen door creaked open like it always did. She was sitting on the couch with a throw blanket over her knees, watching one of those shows where people renovate old houses with impossible budgets. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Twice in 1 week, did you run out of frozen dinners again?" she teased. I almost laughed, almost. "Can we talk?" I said. Her smile faltered. She muted the TV. I told her everything, slowly, from the name on my phone to the man's voice to the words he'd said. "Robert's alive. He's in Connecticut. He doesn't want to talk to us." She stared at me like I'd just recited a poem in a language she didn't know. And then after a moment she laughed. Not a happy laugh, a tired, broken one. "Of course he's alive," she said, "of course." It took her a long time to explain, a lot of stopping and restarting. She'd suspected, she said, not from the start but maybe a few years after. Something about the way the person had called, the lack of official paperwork, the fact that Robert had never really said goodbye, just vanished after an argument that neither of them talked about again. "He was always the one to disappear," she said, "even when we were kids, but I never thought he'd do it like this." I asked what the fight was about. She shook her head. "Does it matter now?" I wanted to tell her it did. I wanted to demand every detail, every scrap of reason why her brother would rather be thought of as dead than pick up a phone, but I didn't. Instead, I sat beside her, and we listened to the low murmur of the muted television. Eventually, she looked at me and said, "Will you go?" I nodded. I called the facility the next morning. Spoke to the same man, Stephen, told him I wanted to visit. He said I could, but he warned me Robert had been very clear about his wishes. No visitors, no contact. He wasn't legally allowed to stop me, but he wanted me to know it might not go well. I booked a flight anyway. I don't know what I expected when I landed in Connecticut. Maybe some poetic twist of fate. Maybe for Robert to look like the man in my memories, tall, lean, always in motion. a flannel shirt rolled at the sleeves, that smell of motor oil and spearmint gum, the way he used to lift me onto his shoulders when I was 5, telling me I'd be taller than him by middle school. What I found instead was a quiet, gray building with flickering fluorescent lights and a receptionist who barely glanced up as I signed in. Room 217. I knocked once, then opened the door. The man inside was thinner than I remembered, pale. His eyes were the same, though, sharp and searching. He looked at me for maybe half a second before turning his gaze back to the window. "I told them I didn't want anyone coming," he said. His voice was rougher than I expected, gravelly, not cruel but cold. I stepped inside anyway. "I'm not here to make you feel bad," I said. "I just want to understand." Silence. "I'm your nephew," I added, though it felt ridiculous to say out loud. Still no reply. He didn't ask about Mom, didn't ask about anyone, just stared out that window like the parking lot beyond it held answers he hadn't figured out yet. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. We didn't speak for a long time. And then finally he muttered, "She should have left me alone a long time ago." His words hung there for a while. She should have left me alone a long time ago. I didn't react right away. I just sat there with my hands folded, elbows on my knees, eyes on the floor tiles. They were speckled beige and brown like old cafeteria floors. One tile near his nightstand had a long crack running across it, filled in with something that looked like dried glue. That's where I stared, trying to figure out what the hell he meant. "You know she thought you were dead, right?" I said finally, quiet but steady. He didn't answer, just scratched the inside of his palm, slow and absent-minded. "I thought you were dead." Still nothing. "I was 20, I said, when we got that call. You'd been gone for years already, but it still hit her hard. She cried for days." I saw his jaw tighten a little, barely. He turned from the window, finally looking at me directly. She knew I didn't want to be found. I tilted my head, staring at this man who used to sneak me candy from the gas station, who let me drive his truck when I was 14, who'd vanish for years and then show up at Christmas like nothing happened. "She thought you were in trouble," I said, "all those years, and then when she heard you died, something in her just went quiet, like she gave up hopping." Robert looked away again. "She always had a way of making everything about her," he muttered. It stung more than I expected. I sat back in the chair, rubbed my face. The fluorescent light above us buzzed faintly. "Why'd you do it?" I asked. "Why disappear like that?" He didn't answer. So I waited. And eventually he sighed, the kind of sigh you don't come back from. "You ever been trapped in a family that tells you what love should look like, but only if you behave the way they want?" I didn't answer, not right away, because I had, and he knew that. He was staring at me again. His eyes were the only thing about him that hadn't aged past recognition, still piercing, like they could pin you to the wall if they wanted. "I tried," he said. "I really did. I came back, you remember that?" I nodded. "Yeah, you came back for Christmas. I was 13. I brought her a necklace." I remembered, a thin silver chain with a bird charm. He said it was a sparrow because they always find their way home. "She called it cheap," he said, voice flat, said it looked like something out of a vending machine. That I didn't remember. "She said I only came back when I needed money, told me I was a burden, that I should just go back to wherever I'd been hiding." He looked at me again, so I did. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to defend her. Part of me wanted to ask what he'd done to make her that angry. But mostly, I just felt like I was standing in the middle of a war zone with no idea who'd thrown the first punch. The next 2 hours passed in fragments. He didn't kick me out, that surprised me. Instead, he talked slowly, sparingly. He told me about the years he spent overseas, working odd jobs, living cheap, trying to outrun something he wouldn't name. He lived in Thailand for a bit, then Malaysia, then the Philippines, never long enough to plant roots, just long enough to avoid phone calls and questions. "I wasn't running from the law or anything," he said. "I just didn't want to be anyone's disappointment anymore." That sentence stuck. He'd burned through savings, worked on fishing boats, cleaned hotel bathrooms, repaired motorcycles, sent a postcard once, maybe twice, then stopped. Said every time he reached out, it somehow made things worse. "Your mom's good at guilt," he said. He didn't say it cruelly, just plainly, like someone reading off a chart. "And you?" I asked. "Why not me?" He looked at me like I was missing the obvious. You were her son, he said. By extension, that made you part of her. That pissed me off more than I expected. So you punished me for being born, I snapped, for being a kid who looked up to you. He didn't flinch, just leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. I couldn't be the uncle you wanted, he said. Better to be dead than another letdown. I left shortly after that. Told him I'd come back the next day. He didn't ask me to, but he didn't say no either. Back in my hotel, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, trying to fit the man I'd met today into the one from my childhood memories. The one who used to lift me up to reach the cookie jar. The one who smelled like motor oil and pine sap. The one who vanished for good when I was 20. I called my mom. It was just after 10. She picked up on the second ring. Well, she asked, voice shaky. He's alive, I said, and complicated. She didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, that sounds about right. I told her what he said about the necklace, about her words, about why he left. She didn't deny any of it. I was angry, she said. He'd been gone so long, then he just showed up and acted like everything was fine. Did you mean what you said to him? Another pause. I don't know anymore, she whispered. Maybe I did, maybe I wanted to hurt him for hurting me. I didn't know what to say to that. He said he didn't want to be anyone's disappointment, I told her. She laughed softly. That's rich. He was our parents' golden boy, could do no wrong. I didn't get that impression. She sighed. You never knew them, not really. Our parents were harsh. You had to earn their love. He did, I didn't, until he started disappearing. There it was again, that word, disappearing, like he was a magic trick that kept getting out of the box. I went back the next day. He was sitting up in bed this time, staring at a book he clearly wasn't reading. You came back, he said, not looking at me. Yeah, I had some questions. He made a face halfway between annoyance and amusement. I figured. I sat in the same chair, same cracked tile under my boot. Why now, I asked. Why let them find you? He hesitated. Stroke scared me, thought I was dying. I told them my real name in case it happened. Why not just call her? He gave me a tired look, because I knew how she'd react. You don't. She'd tell me I waited too long. I didn't argue, he might have been right. I'm not here for her, I said, I'm here for me. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not warmth exactly, but maybe a faint, grudging respect. You always had more spine than I gave you credit for, he said. We talked longer that day about stupid things. Baseball, old sitcoms, his favorite roadside diner from the 80s. I told him I remembered the comic books he used to bring me. He smiled at that, just barely. Then I asked him something I hadn't meant to. Do you regret it? He blinked. Running away, faking your death, cutting us all off. He didn't answer right away, just stared at his hands, pale and thin, folded in his lap like they didn't belong to him anymore. No, he said, not for the reasons you think. I waited. I regret hurting you, he said. I regret not being someone worth remembering. That night, I walked out of that facility into the parking lot, and for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just sad. And that was harder. The third day I visited him, I brought coffee. The nurse at the desk raised an eyebrow when she saw me with the paper tray. I just nodded and said, Room 217. She let me pass without comment. When I got to his room, the blinds were open for once. He was sitting up, shirt buttoned crooked, watching something on the tiny TV mounted in the corner. A game show, I think, the kind with loud buzzers and flashing lights. I held out the coffee, didn't know if you still drank it. He took it without looking at me, sipped once, grimaced, burned. You're welcome. He chuckled, and that startled me more than anything. We didn't talk for the first 10 minutes, just sat there, two men with too much between them, pretending it wasn't weird to sip burnt coffee in silence. Then he clicked off the TV and said, Tell me about your mom. I blinked. Now you're curious. He didn't rise to the bait, just looked at me, waiting. So I told him about the way she'd started feeding stray cats after she retired, how she had names for each of them, Clementine, Mr. Tux, Garbanzo, how she clipped coupons like it was a competitive sport and watched crime dramas with a notebook in her lap like she might solve the case before the detectives did. I told him about her knee surgery, how she never asked for help but winced every time she took the stairs, how I stayed with her that week and found a note she'd written to herself in the medicine cabinet. "You are not a burden, you are getting better, breathe." His face stayed unreadable the whole time, but he kept listening. "She still wears the necklace," I said finally. That got a reaction, a flicker of surprise. "She told me it was cheap," he muttered. She was angry. People say stupid things when they feel abandoned. He rubbed his thumb along the coffee lid, silent. "She thought it was a sparrow," I added. "It was. She kept it." He didn't say much after that, not for a while. Eventually, he told me more about the years between the lie and now. Said he spent a lot of time in rural Thailand, then a stretch in the southern Philippines, got by on under-the-table work and just enough charm to keep people from asking questions. He'd been in and out of clinics in the last decade, mostly for blood pressure, one bad kidney stone, and the stroke that finally landed him here. "Ever think about reaching out before the stroke?" I asked. He sighed. "All the time, but thinking's easy. Doing it would have meant explaining." "Explaining what?" He looked at me with that tired, weathered face and said something I didn't expect. "That I didn't leave because I hated anyone. I left because I didn't know how to stay." I told my mom he was talking more, that he remembered things, that he asked about her. She didn't know what to do with that information, said she needed time. Said, "I want to be angry, but I'm tired." I understood that. I was tired too. On the fourth day, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Are you happy?" I blinked. "What?" He nodded at me. "You got a job, a place, maybe someone waiting for you back home. Is it enough?" It felt like a trick question. "I don't know," I said. "Some days, other days I feel like I missed the train and I'm pretending I meant to walk." He laughed, a real one this time. "That's more honest than I expected." "Yeah, well, you sort of kicked off the honesty trend." He looked out the window. "You know what I learned in all those years away?" "What?" "That no matter how far you run, you're still stuck with yourself, and your silence doesn't make people forget you, it just makes them rewrite the story without you in it." I didn't know what to say to that. So I didn't. That night, I found myself digging through my mom's old shoebox in her hall closet, the one with the old letters, faded photos, and things she hadn't touched in years. Near the bottom was a letter addressed to Bobby. It wasn't sealed. I didn't open it. When I asked her about it, she hesitated. "I wrote that after the call, the one where they said he was gone." "Did you ever send it?" She shook her head. "Didn't have an address." I held it out to her. "You do now." She stared at the envelope for a long time, then she took it. Her hands trembled. The next day I handed it to him, no explanation. He took it without asking, read it slowly, then again. He didn't cry, neither did I. But the room felt different after that, like something had shifted, even if we couldn't name it. "She's still mad, isn't she?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "but she wrote that before she knew you were alive, before she had someone to aim it at." He nodded. "Fair enough." We didn't talk much after that, just sat there. At some point he said, "I used to think being invisible was freedom." I didn't reply. Then he added, "Turns out it's just lonely." Before I left that day, he looked at me and said, "Thanks for not giving up." I shrugged. I had questions, you had answers, felt like a fair trade. He smiled, small, tired, real. On the way out, I stopped by the nurse's station, asked if it would be possible to get him a small radio or maybe a CD player. Stephen, the social worker, nodded. "He's changed since you got here," he said. "Less shut down. He even asked me for a crossword yesterday." I smiled. That's probably because I beat him at the last one. When I got back to my hotel, I called my mom. "He read it," I said. She didn't answer at first, then, "Good. Would you want to talk to him?" Her voice cracked. "Not yet, but maybe." That night, I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and stared at my suitcase. It was half-zipped. My return flight was the next morning. But I didn't move. Because something told me this wasn't finished. Not yet. I didn't get on the flight the next morning. I let the alarm buzz itself out, then sat on the edge of the bed in my socks, phone in one hand, staring at the other. The room smelled like weak hotel soap and stale air conditioning. the kind of smell that makes you feel like you're just passing through someone else's pause button. I texted my manager and told him I needed another few days. He didn't ask why, just sent back a thumbs up emoji and use your PTO, take care. I appreciated that more than I expected. When I showed up at the facility again, Robert was sitting up, dressed, and already working through a crossword puzzle. The coffee I brought him the day before was still on the windowsill, cold now, but not tossed. "You're still here," he said, like I was a math problem that wouldn't go away. "I had a few more questions," I said, sitting down. "You always do." That day, we talked about things we hadn't dared to before. His life before he disappeared. My life after. He asked if I ever thought about leaving everything behind. I told him yes, once when my dad died and I found myself sitting in a funeral home picking out an urn I couldn't afford. I remembered wanting to get in my car and just drive west, past the grief, past the bills, past the small-town expectations. "Why didn't you?" he asked. "Because my mom needed me," I said, "because I didn't want her to lose both of us." He nodded like he already knew the answer, but needed to hear it anyway. I asked him what he remembered most from his childhood. He didn't even hesitate. "This old wooden fence out behind the schoolyard," he said. "It had a plank missing just wide enough to crawl through. Me and your mom used to sneak out through it, ride our bikes down to the creek. She'd collect stones, I'd catch frogs." I smiled. "She still has jars of stones in her kitchen." He chuckled. "Figures." Then his face changed, tightened. "You know, our dad never liked when we did that, said it made us look like delinquents, like we were embarrassing the family." He paused, swallowed. Everything was about image, about not making waves. He looked down at his hands, fingers knotted. I made waves. Later, I helped him call the facility barber and get a trim. He, grown a kind of scraggly beard, half gray, half defiance. They buzzed it off clean. He looked lighter afterward, not younger but more real. Like he wasn't hiding anymore. That afternoon, I brought him a photo album. It was something I'd pieced together from scans on my phone, pictures of our family over the years, birthdays, holidays, my high school graduation, my mom in her garden, my dad holding up a fish like he'd won a medal. And him, Robert, in the few photos that had survived. He flipped through slowly. Stopped on a picture of him holding me as a baby. I was bundled in a blanket, squinting at the world like it had already disappointed me. "I remember this day," he said. "You disappeared 3 months later." He nodded. "I thought I was doing you all a favor." We didn't argue about it. There was no point. Instead, I asked the question I'd been circling for days. "What happens next?" He looked at me, eyes tired but clear. "I don't know." "Do you want to fix things?" He shook his head. "That's not how this works. Some things can't be fixed." "Do you want to try?" That one took longer. "I think," he said carefully, "I want to stop lying." That was enough. For now. The next day, I brought him a burner phone. Not so he could run again. So he could call. I programmed my number into it, my mom too, labeled her just Pat. He stared at the screen like it was heavier than it looked. "I'm not promising anything," he said. "You don't have to." Before I left that afternoon, I found him watching a cooking show on the tiny TV. The host was flamboyant, hilarious, tossing pasta like confetti. Robert was smiling. "You learn how to make that?" I asked. "Hell no, but it's nice to watch someone who knows what they're doing." I nodded. "Yeah, it is." I spent that evening walking along a trail behind the hotel. The trees were tall, silent. The sky had turned that soft, bruised color it gets just before sunset in places with too much cloud cover. I thought about all the years between me and my uncle. All the moments that could have gone differently. And all the ones that still could. I called my mom again. "He's different," I told her. "Not perfect, not even close, but he's not who you thought." She didn't respond right away. Then quietly, "Neither am I." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Do you think he'd take a call?" "I think he'd try." I left the next morning. Didn't say goodbye like it was forever. Just told him I'd see him again. He nodded but didn't get up. As I turned to leave, he said, "Hey." I stopped. "Tell her I kept the sparrow." I nodded. "I will." That flight home felt different. Lighter. Not because everything was healed, not even close, but because some lies had finally been laid to rest. And the truth, messy, unfinished, honest, was finally being let in. The call came on a Tuesday. I was back at work, elbows deep in spreadsheets that didn't care about long-lost uncles or family ghosts. The kind of day where the clock forgets to move and even the vending machine seems disappointed in you. When my phone buzzed, I didn't check the caller ID. I just answered with the usual half-distracted hello. There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade said, "Hey, it's me. My mom." Except it wasn't the version of her that called to ask if I'd paid my car insurance or remind me the cat food was on sale. This voice was smaller, wary, like it was stepping barefoot across broken glass. "I spoke to him," she said. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and walked to the break room without saying a word, just nodded at my coworker at the microwave and shut the door behind me. "You called him?" I asked. "No," she said, "he called me." She told me the conversation lasted 11 minutes and 23 seconds. Not long, but long enough. He asked how she was. She told him not to start with small talk. She asked if he really meant to die in silence. He said he'd never planned on dying. She asked why he never wrote. He said shame doesn't use postcards. She told him about the necklace. He cried. She didn't. "It wasn't closure," she said to me on the phone. "It wasn't neat or tidy, but it was real, and I think that's better." I didn't know how to respond, so I just listened. "I told him about your dad," she added. "About the years he missed." He didn't say much, but I could hear it in his breathing, like something was collapsing inside him. "He said he regretted a lot," I offered. She let out a breath. "Good, so do I." There was a pause. Then she said, "I want to see him." 3 weeks later, I picked her up from the airport in Hartford. She wore her nicest sweater, the one she saved for holidays and funerals. She didn't smile when she saw me, just nodded, folded herself into the passenger seat, and stared out the window. We didn't speak much on the drive, just shared the quiet. When we pulled up to the facility, she didn't move for a moment, just sat there, hands clasped, eyes closed. "I swear to God," she whispered, "if he smells like Old Spice and regret, I'm walking back to New York." I laughed loud and sudden. She cracked a smile, just barely. He was sitting in the same chair, the crossword book open, pen in hand. When he looked up and saw her, something in his expression fell away, like he'd been holding his breath for decades and finally exhaled. "Pat. Bobby." That's all they said. They didn't hug, didn't cry. She sat down across from him. He pushed the coffee toward her. She took it. And they just sat there. It was perfect. I gave them space, walked the halls for a while, talked to Steven at the desk. He told me Robert had asked about physical therapy options, said he wanted to start moving again. "Not bad for a guy who was ready to die alone in silence," Steven said. "Not bad at all." When I came back, the room was quiet. My mom was holding his hand, not squeezing, just holding. He was asleep. She looked up at me, her eyes were red. "I forgot how much he looks like Dad," she said. I nodded. "We lost him a long time ago," she added, "but maybe we don't have to keep losing each other." I sat down next to her. For once, there was nothing left to argue about, nothing to dissect. Just a silence that didn't hurt. We spent the weekend there. Robert didn't say much the next day, but when I handed him the newspaper, he asked me to read it to him, said my voice sounded less judgmental than the TV anchors. I read the whole thing, sports, weather, even the classifieds. He fell asleep halfway through the job listings. The day we left, my mom leaned in and kissed his forehead. He didn't flinch. When we got back to the car, she opened the glove box, pulled out the necklace, and hung it from the rearview mirror. The silver bird spun gently as we drove. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address, but I didn't need one. Inside was a folded page torn from a crossword book, 3 clues circled in red pen. 13 across, home. 26 down, forgive. 7 across, begin again. And at the bottom, in shaky handwriting, "You were never just an extension of her, you were the only reason I came back. R." I don't know what the future holds for him, or for us. Some days he calls, some days he doesn't. Some days I wonder if he'll ever come home. But I know this much. He's not dead. And he never really was. He just didn't know how to be found. Now finally he's trying. And for the first time in my life, that's enough. If this story moved you, subscribe for more real-life confessions and emotional journeys like this one. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important.